Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Rich here, your co-host here as well, and we are in part 2 of Don't Let Your Geology Mess Up Your Theology, written by our famous Doug Sharp right here. Pretty excited about this. So we're in chapter 2, and it's kind of an exciting thing. That we're talking about basically the geology from the biblical perspective. Is that basically it?
Creation Geology Explained.
All right.
And so what we want to do is to go to the Word of God, and ask the question, how do we actually interpret the Word of God, or the Bible as the Word of God, and to do it properly and according to, and how we interpret it according to what we see in the geology.
Yeah, and the thing is, we come to this table with our bias fully revealed. We believe the biblical text is accurate, and we know people tell, well, it's not a science textbook, but when it touches upon history, science, whatever else, it's accurate. Okay, it is. There's a reason it's the best-selling book of all time, because people have found truth, and we find that even though we don't use evidence to prove the Bible, we find that the evidence lines up with biblical record quite nicely, Doug. So what are some of the points we want to go through?
Well, I want to actually start out with a couple of quick hits.
Sounds good to me.
Stick a fork in these different things.
Oh, that's right. You were going to. Yeah, let's go for it.
This was something that popped up on my news feed today. Okay, the first one says scientists discover a new type of organism inside the human biome, made from short strings of genetic code, and may bridge the gap between simple molecules and complex viruses. Okay. Now this I've got to see. Yeah. This is something that we need to, because, and then they call it a certain, they call it obelisks or something like that, because they're just, they find it in the human digestive system.
Okay.
And so what this really points to is another little piece of design by God, when you get right down to it. Because if there are indeed little helper molecules sitting around in your gut, well, you have to ask the question where they originate from. This just adds to the whole abiogenesis problem, because not only you have to explain viruses, you have to explain the bacterium, proteins and genes and all this sort of thing, but these are now little working subcellular organisms that actually have a specific task in the digestive system.
Nothing in the material world explains how life comes from non-life and how anything transitions from other things. People oftentimes accuse us of appealing to what the God of the gaps, but the problem is there's so many darn gaps. There's just so many of them, and they never seem to get filled in. Every time they try to fill in one thing, they get 4 more. It just doesn't seem to hold water, at all, as far as a viable theology or a viable philosophy, if you will. And that's the point we keep pointing out. So, Doug, what's your second point here?
Second one was an inner ear fossil was found.
Okay.
From what they say is a 6 million year old ape. Suggests upright walking evolved in ancient human ancestors via 3 phases. And so I was reading this a little bit, and what it was is it's a Chinese researcher, and they found this skull of an extinct ape, or supposedly extinct ape. And so my question is, they said it's 6 million years old. Well, did they do a carbon-14 test on it?
Oh.
Or did they do some other radioisotope dating method on it? Because they can't do it on a fossil. And so this is a thing where it was probably found in a layer which they said is 6 million years old, because it had possibly other
fossils
in it,
or whether plants or animals.
And so, but this is more of an assumption. Now, here's the thing. The question I have is, since this was a Chinese researcher, would he do a piece of research that would contradict the Communist Party narrative,
Well, yeah.
And I think that's the problem that we have in our scientific endeavors right now, is that in order to get grants, you have to come up with an ape that's 6 million years old.
Right.
Getting an ape, if you carbon date it and you get that it's 1,000 years old, well, you're not going to get anything that's going to get you a grant.
Yeah, because unfortunately, the evolutionary lobby has all the money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the thing is, my point is, we use carbon dating. You can't even date something 6 million years old. At least it virtually, it would be untraceable after about 100,000 years. That's given them all the leeway you can get. Carbon-14 doesn't work very well after 50,000 years or whatever at the most.
And of course, so this article started talking about how climate change and the global cooling caused the evolutionary changes in this ape so that it could start walking upright.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And they were pointing to the inner ear, which the skull was crushed, and so they had to find the pieces of the skull that had the inner ear. But if you were talking about the semicircular canals in the inner ear being preserved for 6 million years, okay, you've got some more problems there. But the fact is that the inner ear with the semicircular canals, which is X, Y, and Z axis, the way of the position. These are things that are a sophisticated piece of engineering that God put together. And so this... You can stick a fork in these two little things. You have to learn to analyze what the whole arguments are all about before you really just swallow this hook and line and sinker.
Most people want to swallow hook, line, and sinker because they just don't want to appeal to a supernatural outside of time-space being. And I understand that they want to be autonomous to some extent, but the science is not. We've pointed out over and over and over again. We're going to do it in this geology thing as well. That the evidence really backs up the biblical text in so many ways, and they appeal to these things. It's amazing they will appeal to things they really have no way of getting to it. I like Ken Ham used to say, "Were you there?" Yeah. The idea, and that suddenly extrapolate that it's 6 million years old. I would beg to probably the question, is that your a priori assumption going into this thing based on other things that you've already assumed that was going to be, like you say, the rock strata has these in them, therefore this has got to be this old or whatever. So anyway.
in my book, I sort of start out with what the scriptures say, and I'm going to have you read some of these bullet points here.
Okay. Well,
these are things that we. People say that the Bible is in the science textbook.
Right.
Well, about things that are scientific, it's a science textbook because it makes specific statements.
And it's accurate.
It's accurate. And so let's go with that first bullet point.
All right, first bullet point says, the creation of the earth and its landforms on the second and third days of the creation week. So
that's something that we believe happened. So the question is do you believe this or you don't? And if you don't believe it, then you have to assume that these scriptures are incorrect. You can't have a compromise between what the scriptures say and what you think that the geology of the earth is. So,
see, I like that. Predicate this. It's right before the bullet point, but I like what you said here, Doug. Is we believe that the Bible is true and that it ought to be understood in a straightforward way. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're not trying to manipulate text or do pretzel theology. Here, this affects how we view geology. There are several biblical events that shaped our world, and these are understood clearly from the text. And that first one was, of course, the creation of the earth and its landforms on the second and third day of the creation week. Right. These are 24-hour days. Okay, you want to go to the second
bullet point?
Okay, the period between the Garden of Eden and the start of Noah's flood, where life abounded. The text is clear on what this would be.
Right, and so there was like a period of like 1,500 years.
Well, use the Masoretic text, 1,656 years.
Yeah,
I can tell you that. Okay. Use a Septuagint, it's longer. But Okay, so do you want to go to the third one?
Third one is that there was a global flood. And
Yes, it's the fountain. It was created primarily, the fountains of the deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. Most creationists, and Doug and I are on the same page here, I would say that the fountains of the deep were the primary source of the waters.
Right.
There were subterranean chambers or waters up below the continents, and that the rain for 40 days and 40 nights was an after effect, if you will, of the tsunamis and the giant fountains of the deep breaking up. But whatever it is, we know that those two events, those two things were described pretty much in detail, I think, for the short amount of time allotted to it in space.
Now, there's actually two different creationist models that are proposed for what happened during the flood. And one is Dr. John Baumgartner. He has this model that he proposed called Catastrophic Plate Tectonics.
Yes, okay.
Then there's Walt Brown, who has a hydroplate theory. And I'll explain a little bit of the differences. The hydroplate theory is subterranean caverns of water that the plates of the continent slid over.
Kind of resting, yeah. Okay.
And so both of these models have the continents moving at a rapid pace.
Yeah, instead of continental drift, we're talking about continental sprint. I've heard it postulated up to 45 miles an hour the continents might have been moving. That is some movement. Wow, that is something else.
And you're talking about it moving on either the magma or on the hydroplates.
Yes.
And Baumgartner's theory talks about the continental plates at their contact point, one sliding underneath the other.
Right.
And there's and the one that's underneath gets sucked into the mantle, and so it actually pulls it along.
Okay.
And so it was that rapid subduction that caused the continents to move.
Well, Doug, is there any evidence that seems to be more conclusive one way or the other?
I know that the hydroplate theory has sort of fallen a little bit in disfavor, except there is, and I guess that depends upon the preferences of the creationists who are looking at it. There was a hydroplate conference that just took place in just a little while ago.
Oh, really?
And I'm sort of interested in digging into that a little bit to find out, what these people are saying, knowing that there's an alternative theory out there that's more popular than theirs, and trying to figure out.
Because I remember reading Walt Brown's book many years ago, and I was really enthralled by it. Then this other one comes out, but the point is, Doug, there's at least two models for how this could have happened. We're not saying, we have the same problem that the evolutionists have in some respects. We weren't there either.
Right.
Okay? But when you come up with reasonable models and explanations, I think Walt Brown had a good thing about what is a good scientific theory. Number one, it's got to be explanatory value. Okay? It basically explains what you see and what's the best explanation. The other one is it's predictability. Okay? In other words, when you say things that are going to happen, does it happen?
Right.
Okay, or do you find evidence for these things? And you say if this was true, then would be some of the effects of it. And the other one, what was the third one? I can't remember the third one. There was a third
Parsimony?
one. Yeah, parsimony, exactly. In other words, you don't create, like evolutionists seem to be continually doing, ad hoc explanations to prop your theory up if something is falsified or proven to be not very reasonable. Evolutionists have a knack, Doug. They come up with one ad hoc. Well, this, and some of them make some sense, but why didn't they come up with it beforehand? Why did they keep over and over and over again? They keep coming up.
And instead of a prediction, they have a postdiction.
They have a postdiction. Yeah, they do not have a prediction. So those are the three things. Yeah. So, all right, Doug, want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
So, we talked a little about the range 40 days and 40 nights. I don't know if you want to go any more about that. So then the next one is the waters prevailed on the earth and covered the high hills and the mountains. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, Doug.
Yeah, this doesn't mean that they had to be Mount Everest.
That's what I wanted you to get to, because that's the thing. People think, well, you got Mount Everest and these mountains that are like 15, 20, 30,000 feet high. You know, I think, what's Mount Everest? 29,000 something feet. Anyway, the stratosphere would have been so thin or whatever. Point of it is that we believe, and again, we weren't there either, but there seems to be evidence of this thing, that the mountains and the hills were really they were much lower than they are today.
Right.
In fact, there's a scripture in there that talks about the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. Was it Psalm 110, I think, something like that?
Something like that.
Anyway.
But you have marine fossils on top of Mount Everest.
That's what's cool, yeah.
And so we do know that at one time, the top of Mount Everest was underwater. We have same thing, marine fossils, seashells on the top of Mount Ararat. That's not nearly as tall as Mount Everest, but all the high mountains, many of them, I don't know whether maybe all of them do, have marine fossils on the top of them. Right.
And how does the evolution explain this? Again, they usually come up with an ad hoc explanation, but it makes sense from the biblical text. This was happening during the year of the flood.
And the biblical plate tectonics model would have the plate that has India on it moving towards the north,
Yes.
and pushing up the mass of rocks which formed the Himalayas.
Yeah, and when you look at the mountain ranges, it's very interesting. We look at it like a global topographical map. It almost looks like land waves many times. You know, it's like it looks like they were tidal waves. And if you think about what happened with the magma underneath was moving, and it's more viscous. It's kind of it's much less volatile than the surface waters. You could see, and it could cause the surface layers to buckle up and do all kinds of weird things, creating higher mountains, and by the same token, lower like the Marianas Trench in the oceans. And actually, it's kind of like you're scrambling up a surface, and it goes down and up at the same time. Especially if you have something that's a little bit more liquidy or not as solid as the top one. All right, Doug.
Something I mentioned in the book a little bit later on is the geology of Nebraska.
Oh yeah, do you want to hit that a little bit?
And
I think
I find interesting about that is I saw this on Google Earth. If you look at it from Google Earth's perspective, from the satellite, it looks like a whole bunch of wave patterns that you see in the sand, you know, and so the sand hills in Nebraska really show that there was a whole pattern of current of water that went over this the top of this as the sand was being deposited.
You know, and Doug, there does seem to be some evidence, if you will, that the flood, it wasn't like the whole world was covered instantaneously with water. It even talks about the waters moving to and fro over the earth.
Right.
There seems to be tidal aspects to the flood. The waters would come up and maybe move backward a little bit, and then come farther as eventually they would cover things. And you can see that in the way the sediments were laid down. We have continent-wide sedimentary layers. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And sedimentary layers are how do you get sedimentary rock?
Yeah, you get lots of billions of dead things laid down on
rock layers all over the earth, laid by water. And that's the thing. This is 3/4 of the surface of the earth is covered in sedimentary rock. Yet there's no evidence for water covering it.
Yeah, and if you sort of leveled out all the mountains in the earth, to cover the earth, you'd have the entire earth with a mile of water on top of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. People ask you, where did the water go?
Yeah.
Well, it's still here. Okay?
Yeah, they don't have any trouble believing that there was a flood on Mars.
Yeah, well, there's no water. Or very little, or ice maybe.
But here we have a planet that's 3/4 water, and
the land masses are 3/4 were covered underwater at some point, and you have the problem with a worldwide flood.
And if you look at the ocean basins, they're basalt. Basalt is a volcanic rocks that form underwater, and that is what pushed the continents apart.
Yep.
And so you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is where we believe that the continent split, and that they separated during the global flood. Let's go to the next one.
All right, Doug. Okay, so this next one is the tough one. In this flood, the worldwide Noachian flood, all of the creatures on the earth, except those in the ark, died and were buried in the flood deep in the sediment, forming layers of coal, oil, and gas. This is Genesis 7, verses 21 through 23. Now, these layers average about 900 feet deep and can be up to 12,000 feet deep. That's incredible, Doug.
Yeah. Now, a little correction to that. This would be all the land animals.
That's a good point. Yeah, because people always say, how could you fit all the animals on the ark?
There were no aquariums.
No aquariums on the ark, okay? You didn't need that. And most of the sea creatures died, but he only took 2 land animals.
Yeah.
All you need is 2 of each kind to survive. So, yeah. So air breathing, those who basically took their oxygen out of the air through a lung of some sort, flying, land creatures, that kind of stuff. Yeah. All right. So the flood lasted 150 days.
Yeah.
And I guess that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Genesis 7:24. The waters then returned off the earth after the 150 days. So the entire earth was covered for 150 days. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's Genesis 8:1 through 5.
There's a drying period.
There's a drying period, yep. And that's the next one. There was a period where the earth was drying out. Yeah, Eric Von Fange, remember a friend of ours, he's passed away now, he's a great guy, talked about the great desiccation or the desertification, where a lot of deserts and things started being, because for many hundred years, there are areas we think that, well, you can even notice, nobody really disagrees with this too much, things like the Sahara Desert and other areas that were actually quite lush. But over centuries of time, they dried out. It became drier and drier. So there was a talk about climate change.
Yeah.
Well,
and if you take a look at Antarctica, that apparently had a lush environment at one time.
Yeah, they found palm trees and
Right.
all kinds of tropical vegetation up there and stuff like that, buried under the ice, buried under other stuff. So now, and the last point here, Doug, which you want to go, the aftermath of the flood resulted in a new weather pattern that we believe created massive glaciers and ice in the northern and southern parts of the world. You want to talk about that, Doug?
Well, we're now talking about Michigan geology.
All right. I know this is one of his favorite things.
Now, this is something that puzzled me for a while, because if you look at the bedrock of Michigan, it's a basin. You have the younger rocks in the middle, and then as it goes out from the center, it gets progressively older and older and older until you get to the Upper Peninsula, where you have the pre-Cambrian rocks of the Keweenaw Peninsula.
Okay, yeah. Right.
And so, then the layers of rock that are where the pictured rocks are, those are Cambrian. But on top of all these, this bedrock is an area of glaciation, and that's why you don't find dinosaurs in Michigan, because actually Tim Clary, the Institute for Creation Research, says that there was a spot more in the western part of the United States, in Texas through the Utah and Arizona, where the dinosaurs sort of gathered. And that's where they ended up being buried, was in that particular area.
Okay.
But here in Michigan, it was covered by the glaciation, and the glaciation is throughout the entire topsoil of Michigan. And so that's part of what I think we have a really good model for the Ice Age. And talk about climate change, which we just talked about in this little thing, they wanted to throw that into this inner ear of the ape study as being the reason for a man walking upright.
You know, and the thing is, Doug, we've had over the centuries, we've had many severe and less severe climate fluctuations. We had, but they really, they must have been quite something right post flood. You know, post flood, there must have been tremendous. I mean,
well, you would have had warm oceans.
Warm oceans and cold land masses.
Would have been warm. The Antarctica would have been warm because of the temperature from the volcanic eruptions that took place. And there was one objection to this, was that where did all the heat go? You know, from the eruptions, there had been so much heat that it would have fried everything on the earth. It would have evaporated all the water, and the thing about that is that the outer space is actually a very good natural heat sink.
Oh yes, explain that, Doug.
Okay, well, as everything rises up, you know, you're going to have the condensation. It's not going to, it's going to absorb all that heat, so there's no heat problem.
Okay, that sounds good to me. But you also, Doug, even after the flood, there were still there fluctuations of cold temperatures and warm areas and things like that all over the world. I mean, we think that even the ice age was probably maybe 100 years after the flood, could have been close to the time of Moses.
Yeah.
At least 400 years, depending on which time frame.
And you had the ice building up because of the weather pattern, the warm oceans piling up the water as it goes over the land. It gets colder. And
do they have a good explanation for the snow engine? Doug, there really is not a good non-flood scenario that can explain why these mammoths would have been buried the way they were. And I mean, we're talking about subtropical freeze zones, like instantaneous buttercups and undigested food and things in their mouth. It would have been quick like freeze dried, things like that. And so even after the flood, there was still some quite violent weather patterns that were going on there. We think the creation model works very well with an ice age, but we don't believe in many ice ages. We believe in basically one ice age, but we believe in temperature fluctuations over the centuries, and it's been steadily settling down. Like our volcanic eruptions, we still got a volcano erupting, like Mount St. Helens, of course, and Krakatoa in the last century, and you got Vesuvius. You know, but over the centuries, we find less and less of that. We don't find as much volcanism as we have even in the past, even in human what they secular time frames. You know, so that there has been quite a bit of change in that regard. But it seems to be more quiescent, and I think it will be that, Doug, until the end time comes. We'll worry about climate change. I'll tell you, when the Lord returns, you're going to have some serious climate change.
Well, I remember 77 and 78, the winters of that. We were worried about
an ice
age coming, and for a very good reason. Those are pretty brutal.
Then it was global warming. Now it's climate change, because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to just follow all these rabbit trails and see if you can come up with a biblical explanation for it. Over 50 years or whatever it is I've been studying this, I haven't seen one question that really hasn't got a good answer.
I agree. Yep.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our show tonight. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.